Hi, this is Andy. There's a change you've probably been wanting to make. Can you think of one? I mean, it could be that you even know what to do. The problem is doing it, like remembering it or following through, and perhaps not beating yourself up because you haven't made progress. Whatever it is that you'd like to change, we have good news for you in this episode. Katy Milkman joins us to talk about her fantastic new book, How to Change. Perhaps you've read books about habits or listened to TED Talks on this subject. Well, today you're going to hear from the behavioral scientist who's done a lot of the work that's shared in those resources. In today's discussion, Katy will help us understand why our best intentions to change often fail us. She'll talk about what fresh starts are and how to leverage them. You'll learn about commitment devices and how you could use them to, say, prepare for a certification exam. And you'll learn about how you can use all of these and even more ideas to help you achieve the changes you desire. It's an insightful discussion about a powerful book that I can't wait to share with you. Hey, quick note, I want to invite you to join our Lead 52 family. It's a group of global leaders who are committed to improving our ability to lead and deliver. Each Monday, you get an email from me that can be read in 5 minutes or less. I introduce a leadership concept that we all focus on that week. It's 52 weeks of leadership learning delivered right to your inbox, taking less than 5 minutes a week, and it's all for free. Learn more and sign up at getlead52.com. Let's jump in today's discussion with Katy about her new book, How to Change. Katy, thank you so much for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here, Andy.
Hey, before we get into the book, I'd love for our listeners to learn more about you. And this is what I mean. It's not a typical path that you followed to get to where you are. Can you think of any influences? Let's go way back from your family culture or experiences growing up that may have helped form you into someone that Angela Duckworth now describes as a master of human nature.
Oh gosh, that's a hard question. It's hard to introspect about those sorts of things.
I'm sure.
But I certainly feel like I've had the wind at my back in life. I had two incredibly supportive parents, and they, made a lot of sacrifices to ensure that I got a great education and to support me and doing the things that I cared about. Another pretty formative experience for me was that I was a very serious competitive athlete in my teenage years and also played Division I college sports. I played tennis. That was my sport. And I think the experience of being alone out on the court with an opponent year after year and learning to get through that mentally tough battle, really, and also how to hone strengths and weaknesses and practice deliberately to grow and deal with failure, which is, by the way, part of individual sports and particularly individual tournament sports to a degree that it is nothing else. Unless you win a tournament, you fail at some point. Basically everyone except the person who's number one in the world is failing constantly in every situation. So those things I think really taught me a lot of important lessons, and I do feel like that shaped the work I did first as an engineering student, which is where I started my academic career, and later as a behavioral scientist. And I feel like I've pulled a lot of the insights both from my engineering days and from my days as a competitive athlete into the work I've eventually done on behavior change.
Yeah, I think was it your fiance, now husband, who just said, "This is a problem. Can't you just fix it? Like you put your engineering mind to it." And I have to tell you, the Andrew Agassi, the Agassi story.
The Andre Agassi story,
Agassi, yeah, that story you share early on. I knew about him a little bit, but I didn't know that story. So there's all kinds of things I'm sure you learned from those tennis years and your work since. There's no shortage of apps and TED Talks and books and blogs and podcasts or more to help us change, right? And sometimes it feels like it's common sense. If I want to lose weight, Katy, I need to change how I eat and exercise. Right? If I want to further my career, I need to do more networking. And yet we don't do those things, or at least stick with them. Why is it that these tools and techniques designed to spur change so often fail us?
Yeah, it's a great question. And first of all, I should say that one of the most important things we've learned about change is that information isn't enough. And those two examples you just gave, knowing I should network more, knowing I should eat a healthier diet, those things, they just aren't enough. to actually change our behavior. Time and again, research shows that information, it's only the beginning. We need many more tools and tactics. And I think the key reason is that well, first of all, there's lots of external barriers to change, of course, right? Like a whole junk food industry trying to peddle things that aren't in your best interest. And we often don't have the time or financial resources to achieve our goals, or the social support. So the external world is often working against us. But what I focus on in my work and in my book is the internal barriers that can also get in our way, even when we are in the incredibly lucky position, which is rare, to have everything else lined up in our favor. We're still fighting an uphill battle when it comes to self-control or impulsivity, which is sort of the flip side. So we tend to struggle to do the things that are in our long-term best interest because we overweight instant gratification. We tend to be creatures of habit. You've mentioned habit a few times in this conversation already. And absolutely, we take the path of least resistance, which includes sort of autopilot, whatever habits we've gotten used to. And that is a good feature of human nature in many cases, because you want to be an efficiency-loving individual. But on the other hand, it can hold us back when we want to make a change and pivot from where we are. And that's just the beginning. There's other barriers to change that I focus on in the book, including, forgetfulness, lack of confidence. The list sort of goes on and on. Even having a desire for conformity can be a constraint. The reason, though, that I think even when we have access to some of the tools that science has proven can be useful in helping us change, the reason I think we underutilize those, or under benefit from them, I should say, that I sort of focus on as a center point in my book, and that I use the story you mentioned about Andre Agassi to help illustrate, is I see too often that people and organizations trying to create change just latch on to the latest exciting, buzzy sounding idea, maybe even one that's been proven to work, without actually paying a lot of attention to whether that idea or that scientific trick is well suited to solving the specific barrier to change that they're facing. So if you, keep forgetting to take your medications, and that's why you aren't adherent, and then you look for a strategy to solve your problem that's focused on making your medication tastier or giving you social support, that is not going to work if forgetting is the barrier. You need reminders, right? On the flip side, if memory has nothing to do with it, if you're not taking a medication or getting to the gym regularly when you should be because it's miserable, it has negative side effects, you hate the experience, all the reminders in the world aren't going to do any good. So what I've found is it's incredibly important to actually figure out what is the specific barrier to change, try to tackle that using scientifically proven tools. And I organized my book and organized a lot of my work around laying out the specific barriers to change, and then what we know can tackle those barriers so we can match our problem and solution.
That's so good. I love in the book you say, well, one of the reasons why it's, let's just say it's hard. So that is one of it. But I love where you went with it in the book, and you explained that so nicely, Katy, that a more useful answer might be, we just haven't found the right strategy for us yet. And I feel like that's the gift of your book, is it's not do these 5 things. It's like, I don't remember exactly how you said it, but it's something like you need to isolate the weakness that's preventing your progress and then pounce on that. Or isn't it something like that? I think that's the thing. So we're going to give people a little taste in this interview of some of those things. How about this? It's common to joke about New Year's resolutions, like, they don't make it to January 3rd, but you found some pretty compelling evidence that fresh starts can be powerful influences. So what is it that we miss when we write off the value of, say, a New Year's resolutions? And I'm interested, are there any ways that you personally use fresh starts?
Oh, wow. Yes, I use fresh starts a lot. I'm a fresh start junkie, I should say. It's probably part of the reason that I've studied this topic. It's absolutely true that you will get nowhere if all you've got is a New Year's resolution and no plan, no social support, no way to actually get from point A to point B, right? And most New Year's resolutions fail, and a lot are going to fail even when you have everything set up to help you succeed, because goal pursuit is hard. But we can't achieve a goal if we don't begin. And so that's why I actually devoted a lot of my research and a chapter of my book to the topic of the fresh start effect. I got really interested in the question of when we are most motivated to change, and therefore might be most nudgeable towards change when I got a great question from an HR leader at Google after presenting some of my research there about a decade ago on different tools and tactics to promote change. And what I was asked was just, are there moments when we should be encouraging our employees to make changes to their health or productivity, and when we should be offering resources? And of course, we all know about New Year's resolutions, and that is a moment when people are more motivated to change. But when I got that question, it immediately occurred to me that there were probably many other moments in life when we were a bit more open to change than usual, and that understanding that could be an incredibly valuable and powerful tool for any of us who wants to promote change in the lives of the people around us or in our own lives. Yeah. So I did a bunch of research on this in collaboration with Heng-Chen Dai, my former PhD student, who's now a professor at UCLA's Anderson School of Management, and also Jason Reese, who's a senior fellow at Wharton. What we found is that moments that feel like new beginnings, because we feel like we're turning a chapter or a page in our life, those are moments when we're particularly motivated to make change. So New Year's is an iconic example of this, but of course the start of a new week, the start of a new month, the start of a new season, the celebration of a birthday, starting a new semester in university or in school of any kind. These are all moments that feel like fresh starts too. Holidays that come with a sense of change, like Labor Day. These are moments when we feel like, okay, I have a bit of a blank slate. We feel dissociated from our past failures. We can say that was the old me, last year, last week that didn't get this done, but the new me can do it. So we can be more optimistic about our capabilities. And we've shown in study after study, first, that this actually happens naturally. So if you just look at when people set goals, when they search for the term diet on Google, when they visit the gym at a higher frequency, it follows these fresh start dates. You see upticks at these moments, but also you can actually highlight these dates to people, particularly the ones that are less well known. So dates like the first day of spring or the celebration of a birthday, which they feel like naturally appropriate moments to begin fresh, but people might not already be putting all their eggs in that basket the way they are with New Year's. We've shown that encouraging change at those moments can be particularly effective. People are, for instance, more open to starting to save for retirement in a 401k plan if we invite them to do that in the future and align that invitation with a date that feels like a fresh start.
We celebrated a family birthday just earlier this week, and I've been trying to change how I'm eating. But you talk about giving yourself the mulligan days or things like that. I like to think sometimes of I think you call them the what the hell moments. Like it's like, oh, all right, so I'll just have another piece of cake, whatever. A sunrise is a fresh start. All right, so that was yesterday. It's a new day. Or even other times that aren't as obvious, like when your advisor said, when you had a journal article get it's like rejected. He was like, hey, revise it, take 48 hours. And it's a new journal opportunity, right? I mean, so we've got these fresh starts if we can label them as such, right? That's a key part of it. And I don't know, maybe you gave an example, but what's an example of one that you're actually trying to use now for you personally?
Well, we just started a new academic semester, and it's a sort of huge fresh start for me in that it's my first semester where I'll be on campus. And for so many faculty, that's the case. Since the start of the pandemic. So not only is it a new academic term, but it's also a return to work, a workplace that I love, but have been absent from for a very long time. And that feels like a huge opportunity to step back and think about what are my priorities going to be. Between that and also, of course, I wrote a book that was published, and that was a huge endeavor. And this is my first semester back at work since that was published, and I'm still talking to people about it, promoting the lessons in it, but writing it is in the rearview mirror. It's been really exciting to have brainstorming sessions with collaborators and students and think about what's next, what's new, what are the big, exciting opportunities. And it's been a great amount of fun. I love fresh starts. They always fill me with a sense of rejuvenation and opportunity.
I agree. Yeah, for many people going back, it'd be like, all right, what's my new morning routine going to be? What will I change when I commute? Will I, so there's a lot of fresh start opportunities. I would love that you led early in the book with that chapter. And I have to tell you, way back in episode 19, so we had Jordan Goldberg to talk about his website Stick, and you talk about Stick in the book about a commitment device. And I suppose it might be a form of gamification as well, maybe there, but I used Stick to lose some weight when I went through that. I found it helpful. Many people listening to us, they sit for certification exams, like a project management certification exams. And I think you had some research with MBA students using commitment devices, if I remember right? So I'm wondering if you could abstract from that research about how someone might be able to use a commitment device to help them prepare for, let's say, a big exam. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the work you're alluding to is by Dan Ariely and Klaus Wertenbrock, and it showed how important it was for students to have deadlines in classes that had penalties associated with them. Students, some understood this and some didn't, but equally spaced deadlines with penalties had this huge benefit of getting people to get their work done on time, not let it all pile up till the end, and as a result, be lower quality. So I think one of the lessons of that might be to use a website like Stick or Beeminder. There are competitors out there too. I love Jordan and his website. Just want to, not be hawking a single single organization. It's a really cool tool, and of course you can just set them up yourself. What you can do is you can put money on the line that you'll forfeit if you fail to achieve a specific goal. So that might be a deadline for taking a certain number of practice tests. For instance, and you might want to have a number of bite-sized commitments as opposed to one giant, like I will take 10 practice tests by this date, probably not as good as I will take one a week for 10 weeks leading up to this date, each with a small penalty for failure. You can choose a referee who will hold you accountable for those goals, and then you can put money on the line that you'll send to an organization you hate. This is one of my favorite features, right? You don't want a silver lining, so they have charitable organizations on either side of hot button topics, right? You can pick, if you're pro guns, you can send money to a group that will try to prevent gun violence, and you can, if you're against guns, you can send it to the NRA, right? So they sort of have hot button issues. You choose your poison, and then you get this added motivation from that incentive. We're used to other people structuring incentives for us, right? You're used to the idea that your government is going to put up a speed limit sign, and that if you speed and you're going to get a fine, and that's going to keep you from being tempted to speed because you realize there's this huge consequence if you mess up, and that might keep you in line. Well, the same is true in this case, but it's just you imposing it on yourself, recognizing the boundaries you need, the temptations you may face, and creating constraints so you won't be giving into temptation when the time comes, and not taking those practice exams, for instance. And research shows this is very effective. So when we have money on the line, it can increase our likelihood of achieving our goals. My favorite study shows that smokers who are trying to quit do about 30% better when they're randomly assigned to have access to a commitment account where they can put money that they'll have to forfeit if they fail a urine test for nicotine or cotinine in 6 months. So these things really do work.
That's good. So every once in a while, someone will tell me, Katy, I'm not going to tell anybody I'm going for the exam, because then if I fail, so it's like a defensive pessimism almost sort of thing. But I think I took away from your book, no, publicize it, post it, put a banner up. I mean, it's not exactly a commitment device, but kind of along the lines.
That is a form of commitment device, right? Yeah. So what you're doing is you're creating a consequence that will be negative and increasing the price of failure. Yeah. Right now, it's certainly you can see why people wouldn't want to do that. Sure. Because there's a downside. If you do not get through, then you pay that price. Yeah. And in fact, a traditional economic theorist would say, why would anyone adopt a commitment device? You're volunteering to take on unnecessary penalties. This is crazy. But if you feel that the benefits of taking the action are so high that giving yourself extra motivation to ensure you don't fall down on the job is important, then it's worth it to put these kinds of constraints on yourself, including the potential shame you face if your friends find out you didn't do it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's uncomfortable, but I think there's an element of which that whole, it's a little bit like burn the ships, right? I mean, I'm going to do everything I can to make this successful. I'd like to build actually on this intention to get a certification. You make it clear in the book. Intentions are only loosely predictive of our behaviors. A lot of times people are like, I'm going to get that certification. I'm going to, whatever it is, right? So what's a way someone could use cue-based planning to remind them to study, let's say, or take questions when they might otherwise get distracted or forget?
I love that you went in this direction. And this is some of my favorite research I've learned about. It's work by Peter Gollwitzer of NYU's psychology department, and it's now really canonical work. It's sort of I think some of the most important research that's been done on goal success. What Peter noticed is that a lot of the time when we form plans, they're really vague, right? We say, I am going to study, I am going to pass this test,
Right.
but we don't think through the exact situations when we will engage in the behaviors we need to engage in order to follow through on our plans. And Peter noticed that the kinds of people who were making really concrete if-then plans, he calls them implementation intentions. So writing down or thinking through, if it's 4 p.m. on a Thursday, then I will sit down and study for an hour at my desk for this exam, and I will always do that. Who think through that, what's the trigger, what's the cue that's going to lead to this action, what exactly is the action, they have much better outcomes. So he started doing random assignment studies showing that if you just get people to write down that if-then statement, if this happens, then I will follow through in the following way, you see increases in follow through on all sorts of behaviors. And while he was primarily studying this in the laboratory in the context of, maybe not always the most consequential decisions, or using survey research, in the last couple of decades, this work has been scaled up in some really consequential environments and proven quite effective. So if you've ever had anyone knock on your door to try to convince you to vote, and they've asked you, when will you vote, where will you vote, and how will you get there? That's based on research by my colleague, Todd Rogers, who found that script, getting you to make this implementation tension where you think through the details of your voter execution, has a substantial impact on voter turnout. I've done research showing that asking people these kinds of questions about getting a vaccine, when we were focused on flu vaccines, increases the likelihood people actually follow through and get a vaccine in large field experiments. So this is something you can do to help yourself, but you can add commitment if you want to make it even stickier. I think, it works for so many reasons. It embeds things more firmly in our memory, which is maybe the most important. Now that cue is going to trigger our memory. That's the way memory is jogged, is by associations. But it also forces you to sort of break down the plan into a goal into component parts. So it's clear and actionable, and you know what to execute on, which turns out to be important for actual follow through. And it creates a sense of commitment and consistency. We don't like having a commitment and then not completing it. And the more concrete the commitment is, the easier it is to say, oh, I really have to do this. Or if it's a vague commitment, it's easier to put off. So for all those reasons, we think planning and using these kinds of cue-based plans is really powerful.
Yeah, I thought that was just a great section. I think that was part of the forgetfulness or forgetting chapter. But do I remember there's also something? Is it Ebbinghaus? Ebbinghaus or House?
Yes. Oh my gosh, you have a great memory.
Well, no, you wrote a book that was easy to read.
I gave you a cue of some sort. Yeah. Cued Ebbinghaus with talking about memory. Yes.
But there's something about engaging. Like I think could help us as we prepare too. What was that study?
Herman Ebbinghaus did this study over 100 years ago now, just looking at how quickly memory fades. And this was it was using cutting edge research methods at the time. I think it was literally in the 1800s, which are not so cutting edge anymore, but this has been replicated. But he was basically trying to memorize sort of nonsense syllables himself. And then he would have different intervals of time, and he would quiz himself to see how much he remembered. And he mapped out this forgetting curve, which is basically exponential. Like you forget half of the things you learned with incredible quickness. So, a day later, so much of the knowledge or so much of what we tried to store in memory is gone. And that forgetting curve, I think, just illustrates one of the things that I found in other research nicely is that we think we'll remember. We're not super sophisticated about or sort of knowledgeable about our forgetting problems. So Ebbinghaus showed just how severe they are, but we don't expect that. So we think, oh, I will remember that. And we don't, I think, use enough crutches. And again, my research has borne this out, where we offered people different kinds of memory aids, and we sort of sold them at various prices. And most people said, oh, no, I don't want to pay for that, even if it was going to help them achieve a goal that they valued and that had a monetary value. And then they underinvested and underperformed relative to what would have happened if we had just imposed these on them for free or even at that price.
Yeah. So interesting. One thing I took away from that section, I guess it's not exactly a change, but I think it's a retention of change, because that's a big thing, right? It's one thing to change for a period of time, but can we sustain it? But I think it was with that Ebbinghaus stuff, was the more we engage with information, the longer it's recalled as well. So flashcards or practice questions, like retrieval practice, of
That's
trying to
right.
retrieve
Yes,
it.
these
Yeah.
cues are so critical. Practice is critical. Rehearsal is critical.
Yeah.
These are things we learn as elementary school students when we're studying for our first tests, right? You're learning your multiplication tables, but we don't think of applying those tactics to to-do lists in life. And we actually should, because we often don't follow through on things that matter to us just because we flake out, we forget. And if we use some of these same tricks that we knew worked as kids, even mnemonic devices, right? They can help us follow through and achieve more of our goals. So when, in some cases, forgetting really is a barrier. And I think we underinvest in these tools.
I once heard, and you could, I know you'll know this research if it's really true or not, that in the UK, they were trying to increase organ donations. So they changed it from an opt-in to an opt-out. And I thought of that when you talked about some of your nudges, because my understanding is enrollment skyrocketed, but I've had some conversations with people that go, I think that is not influence. I think that's manipulation. Okay. So I'd love to hear how you found nudges like that, the default sort of stuff, how that's been helpful. But is there a point that comes to mind where a nudge moves from it's influencing to being manipulative? And I guess that has negative connotations. Any thoughts on that?
I think nudges are absolutely a persuasion tool.
Yeah.
And I think when they're used for ill, that it's manipulative, and when they're used along with other, we have lots of policy tools we use that are very clearly designed to change behavior, from speeding tickets, right? Is that, I don't know if that's manipulative. Right. I guess it is. By the end, you can have a speeding ticket. You can have you can imagine requiring all cars to have a default maximum speed. That would be another way to solve the problem.
I suppose,
so you could think of different policy tools, and this is one of them. You mentioned that organ donation example, and actually it's a good one to highlight just because it's such an important problem that tens of thousands of people die each year because they're waiting on a list for an organ donation, and many people who really would, they wouldn't be able to use their organs posthumously. They wouldn't miss them, and probably would be willing to become donors, just have never given this thought unless somebody close to them faces this kind of dire situation. So policymakers have thought a lot about, what's the right way to encourage organ donation. In general, defaults are very sticky. So if we say opt people into becoming organ donors, they have to sign something and say, I would like to become one, but without doing this, I'm not. And you see much lower organ donation rates in countries that have those kinds of policies than opt out, which is where you have to, check a box to say, I don't want to be a donor, but it's made trivially easy. And there's this classic paper from 2001 or 2002 published in Science by Eric Johnson and Dan Goldstein showing this huge gap. But, and this is the big but, it turns out that in reality, this is one of those decisions where there's a lot of legal complications if you haven't actually voluntarily said and very deliberately said, no, I want to be a donor. So it's not clear that it increases the availability of organs when someone has simply not opted out of being a donor. Their next of kin may come and argue about it. So actually, I think the behavioral science community has coalesced pretty strongly around a different recommendation, because it doesn't seem like having people defaulted into being donors does increase organ supply. It seems to be better to require people to make a choice in order to, for instance, get a driver's license. When there's a forced choice, that someone has given you active information, and it's easier to defend against a relative who's not totally sure they really know the preferences of their deceased loved one. So anyway, getting into some esoteric stuff here, but
seriously, but I think a easier one is you are by default opted into the 401k, and something like that. Like you talk about that a lot.
Yeah, nobody fights about that one. Nobody fights. They're really glad to have it for the most part. Well,
when my oldest child graduated from college, he goes, "Hey, can I live at home for a couple of years just as I get ready?" And what we said was, "Yes, you can, but you got to pay us $1,000 a month to live here. But it's not going to go to it'll go into an account, index fund that you get when you leave, but you have to get used. So he by default got used to it. And I think if you by default
what a good choice architect you are.
well, no, I don't know, but he didn't like it at the time. I'll promise you that, but he loved it afterwards. But I think, isn't that kind of like the default savings plans are kind of like that too? Maybe you don't like the idea, but you get used to not having that money then. Isn't that kind of the idea?
Sort of. In your case, you're requiring it, right? So
That's true.
It's a requirement. There's no freedom to
Yeah.
choose, which is sort of a key principle of choice architecture, is that people, you default them into saving for 401k. They don't have to take any action. It happens automatically, but they can always opt out if they really strongly disagree and they don't want to do that with their money. So you didn't give your son that kind of a situation.
Kick him out.
Right. You told him this it's my way or the highway. So he didn't have a choice. Which by the way, there are some things in the world that are so important that it makes sense to have more than just a good choice or more than just a default policy. You want to have mandates. And obviously we're at a moment in a pandemic where there's a lot of discussion about mandates. And but I do think they're a really relevant policy tool, and we shouldn't only lean on nudges when sometimes a shove is necessary to save lives, to ensure comfort in retirement. If you look at Social Security, our Social Security system is a mandate to save.
Right. The interesting thing about mandates is, do people enter the magic circle or not? And that'll be something that they'll have to read the book to really get, because someone can follow, but are they really there, right? So that could be a different conversation. But we've had a number of guests on the podcast talk about habits, and now that I think about it, I think most of them just they're grifting on your work. I mean, so much of what you have in this book is the underlying research that you've done that they did. But I'm just saying that in a kind, jokingly way. But what is something that a lot of the popular books on habits might be missing or under stressing that would be easy for us to miss?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. And by the way, I want to just say I'm thrilled that so many popular books on habit have repackaged the research and shared the key ideas, because that's why we do it. We want it to leave.
Absolutely.
And so I have no hard feelings. I actually have quite the opposite. Tremendous gratitude to all of the best-selling authors who are spreading the word about the research that my collaborators and I have done. So, and it was just fun to get to join the conversation with my own book and share some of the nuance that was missed by non-scientists. So one thing that I think is missed that is really, I think, quite important is the importance of flexibility. And I think to illustrate this, I probably have to tell you about an experiment. I'll try to do it briefly. This is an experiment I ran at Google with about 2,500 of their employees, and I did it in collaboration with Harvard's John Bashirs. So we had this pretty strong hypothesis based on decades of research on habit that if you want to form a sticky habit, the best way to do it is through consistency. And by the way, that's what all the best-selling books on habit tell you, find a cue, figure out what that trigger is, repeat the behavior in that same consistent and performance environment, reward yourself, and a habit will form. And that's right. That's sort of what a lot of research suggested that was done on animals. When you look at the kinds of people who have consistent habits, people who are regular exercisers or take their medication regularly, they tend to do it in the same way each time. So we thought, let's do an experiment to try to see if we could use this as a tool and program people to build a habit around exercise. So 2,500 Googlers signed up. They said, at the beginning of the new year, I want to form an exercise habit, put me in your study. And we randomly assigned them to 2 different experimental conditions. And each condition lasted for a month. And what we secretly well, not that secretly, I think we were pretty straightforward about, we weren't interested in that month. That was sort of the startup period. We were interested in the 40 weeks after that. And what would happen then? Could we figure out a startup strategy that would lead people to form a lasting habit? Okay, so for a month, people are getting rewards for exercise, and we randomly assign them to 2 groups. One group is asked to tell us the best time for them to work out every day. Somebody says 7 a.m. We say, great, we're only going to reward you if you get to the gym at that time. And we're going to remind you to go at that time every day. And this group, over the course of our startup month, ends up working out 85% of their workouts within 2 hours of their sort of magic time. The other group also is encouraged to make a plan because we know that works. What's your best time for working out? Say somebody in that group also says 7 a.m. They also get a reminder to work out at 7 a.m. in that case every day for the month. But they're not only rewarded for 7 a.m. workouts. They're encouraged to work out whenever they want, and they get rewards whenever they exercise. As a result, only about half of their workouts are at the same time. So one group is going really consistently at the same time every day. The other group is more variable. And then we ended up with two groups that go at the same frequency to the gym, but just in different patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And we look and see who has the more lasting habit after this month is over. And I will say my head almost exploded when we analyzed the data, because it was exactly the opposite of what I went in expecting. I was sure that it would be these people with the consistent habit, and it turned out to be the ones who were more flexible in the way they exercise during the startup period. And when we dug into the data to try to understand what is going on, a really clear explanation sort of jumped out. What seems to be happening is the people who exercise at a consistent time, they form a really brittle habit. They go actually a little bit more at their regular time after this month ends. So if they were a 7 a.m. workout person, 7 a.m. is more likely to happen for them for the next weeks than the other 7 a.m. people who were more flexible in their workouts. But if they miss 7 a.m., they don't go at all. On the flip side, the people who had formed a more flexible habit, 7 a.m., they go a little bit less at their magic time. But if they miss that, they have a backup plan. So they're far more likely to exercise at other times too. And net, that leads to a much more robust, lasting behavior change. So actually, if you were a habit researcher, you might even argue it's not exactly habit. It's more, that we're changing the stickiness of engaging in a behavior rather than doing it in a sort of autopilot way. We could even debate whether there is such a thing as an autopilot gym habit, since you have to do, it's not like washing your hands or brushing your teeth. It's a sort of elaborate, it's a really elaborate set of behaviors, but we clearly had the model wrong. So I think that's really important to me. A key lesson from that work, and that for anyone trying to form habits, is we should not actually think of our best approach as being sort of slaves to a single consistent performance environment. Actually, building a flexible habit is more valuable. It's more robust. If you have a first best time, you also want to have a second best time or a second best environment. So, if you want to meditate daily, or if you want to practice for your an upcoming exam regularly, you have a first best, but life gets in the way. Life is messy. So have a second best and a third best, and make sure you have a no matter what plan to get to that practice or behavior, rather than an only under these circumstances rigid plan.
Yeah. So I like the idea of like, I have a streak. Now, maybe I didn't do it at 7 o'clock, but I got it in over lunch, but the streak continues. So the flexibility, I think you're right. I think that to me is empowering. It's not like, oh man, I screwed up. So I screwed up 2 days in a row, so I'm never going to get back, So that too much rigidity part, I think that's good. How about this? Let's say someone on your team's struggling, and let's say it's you, Katy, someone on your team is struggling, and you have some insight, right? You have some insight on how to help them. In short, you have advice. I know from your book that giving them unsolicited advice is probably not going to help. So why is that? And what might you do instead of giving them advice?
Yeah, you're alluding to research that taught me so much by Lauren Eskris-Winkler, who's a professor at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. And Lauren, in her dissertation work, was interviewing people who were struggling to achieve more in all different walks of life, from salespeople to students, and seeing this consistent pattern of one, they were full of insight actually about things that might help them change when she asked, but many had never really thought about it before. And second, she noticed how demoralizing it could be to constantly be pummeled with advice from other people. And she started to wonder if we had the formula wrong for when we see someone struggling, if rather than putting our arm around them and giving them advice, which can make them feel like we think they're clueless and that our 2 minutes of insight into a problem they've been struggling with for so much longer is really going to be the magic recipe, we must think they're a fool. What if instead, she thought, we actually asked them to give advice to someone else, said, what would you do, or put them in the position to mentor someone else or coach someone else who has a similar set of goals and is also struggling. And she thought a few things might happen. One, by putting someone on a pedestal, by asking them to actually give some advice, we convey to them that we believe they've got what it takes, and we may boost their confidence and their self-efficacy, as Al Bandura, the legendary psychology professor from Stanford put it. Self-efficacy is this critical ingredient in success. We don't do anything without believing we have the efficacy to achieve it. She also thought it might be useful because you might dredge up insights you wouldn't have come up with otherwise when you're put on the spot to actually mentor or coach someone else. And then once you've given them advice, you're going to feel hypocritical if you don't walk the talk yourself. So it has all these ingredients. And she's done a lot of randomized controlled trials, and I've gotten to collaborate on some of them, showing that when you actually put people in the position of advice giver, it improves their own outcomes. So one study with 2,000 high school students, the beginning of the third academic quarter, we asked half of the students, randomly selected, to just give advice for 10 minutes on a computer to peers about how to study better. And what we saw is that improved those students' own performance. The advice givers saw improvements in their own grades in both math and the class they most wanted to improve in the subsequent quarter. So these are small effects. I definitely don't want to convey that we're turning C students into valedictorians with a 10-minute intervention, but they were statistically significant effects. And you can imagine, can we find ways to actually enhance this and make it even stronger, more powerful, if people aren't giving 10 minutes of advice on a computer to a peer, but are, giving advice more consistently or mentoring or coaching someone. There's so much we get from being put in that position ourselves, not to mention all of the happiness it gives to help other people. And that the other people benefit too.
Oh yeah, for sure. I guess what I took away from that, Katy, was we often think it's ignorance. So I need to give advice because it's ignorance. And I don't mean that in the as pejorative as it sounds, but it's like, let me enlighten you. It's a confidence issue, not an ignorance issue, right? I mean, isn't that
in some cases? It's right. Yeah. My husband teaches physics at the University of Pennsylvania. I just want to say it's not always a confidence issue, right? Somebody needs to teach you Kepler's laws and so on. But there are contexts, particularly when it comes to goal pursuit, and trying, following through on the things that you mean to do, your intentions, and getting to your New Year's resolutions, where I do not think, it's not rocket science. You don't need somebody teaching you a lot, and we often overlook the confidence barrier.
Yeah. So many more things I'd love to talk with you about, Katy, but let me end with this. We have a lot of parents who listen to the podcast, and you talk about being a mom in the book. Can you think of anything that parents can do to develop some of these ideas from your book as they go about the parenting process? Anything come to mind?
Oh gosh. Well, I am a parent. Certainly, I have a kindergartner, and I will say, little people are different than big people in terms of the things that can be barriers to achievement, and some of the challenges of raising a kid are really, different in terms of issues of, brain development, which shape how much self-control kids have, and authority and desire to break free from authority. So I want to say that I don't think the book is written to help with parenting, but I do hope some of the insights will inspire. And probably my favorite insight, which I think we're most familiar with in the context of parenting, but can help us in all these other walks of life, is how important it is to make it fun to achieve goals. Because both kids and adults, it turns out, are very bad at persisting if they aren't actually enjoying what they're doing. We think we'll be able to just do it, as Nike tells us, but if it isn't actually enjoyable, we tend to quit quickly. It's even more true of kids. So looking for ways to make whatever it is you're hoping to help your kids achieve enjoyable in the moment is really, really critical, I think, rather than just thinking they should be able to push through and plow through misery. Even adults can't do that well, and asking kids to do it when their self-control circuitry in their brain doesn't even finish developing until they're 25. I mean, it's truly preposterous. So we were chatting about Mary Poppins before this began. She really got it right. And the creators of Mary Poppins got it right. Bob Sherman, to be precise, who wrote the lyrics. But a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. We really do need to find ways to make it fun to do the things that are important in the long run.
That's great. And that was solicited advice I asked you for. So thank you very much. That was good. For those listening, I can't tell you how much I personally benefited from Katy's book. I consider her book, How to Change, a must read. Get a copy and start putting these ideas into action. I put links to the book and the book's website in the show notes for this cast. So Katy, thank you for joining us on the People in Produce podcast.
Thanks for having me. So fun to be here.